Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it another minute while our participants get joined into the webinar, and then we'll get started. All right, well, hello, everyone. My name is Angela Wilhelms, President and CEO of Oregon Business and Industry. OBI represents more than 1,600 members who employ more than 250,000 Oregonians across the state. Our members span the state's geography and various industry sectors. The vast majority of our members are small businesses. So thank you for joining OBI today for this webinar. Throughout the webinar, if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A. And just so you know, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the OBI website following the event so that you can share it with your colleagues. So now let's get started, and I'll introduce our moderator and OBI board chair as of, I think, what, two and a half, 3 hours ago, Jordan? Yep. We've got Jordan Pape, CEO of the Pape Group. Jordan, take it away.
Thank you, Angela. The 2022 legislative session is 1 week in, and legislators are busy thinking about the policy bills and funding requests. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by 4 caucus leaders in the Oregon legislature who can provide insightful perspective on the priorities for this session. I'll introduce all of them and then ask each to provide some brief opening thoughts about the session, and then we'll move over to Q&A. Joining us today are House Democratic Leader Julie Fahey from Eugene, where I happen to be right now. Representative Fahey has been in her position as leader for just a few weeks. Also new to her position as leader of the House Republican, on the House Republican side is Vicki Breese Iverson from Prineville. From the Senate, we have Senate Republican leader Tim Knoop from Bend, who was elected as leader this past fall, and Democratic leader Rob Wagner from Lake Oswego, who became the caucus leader in spring of 2020. This has certainly been a unique time in the legislature with virtual operation and what appear to be unprecedented turnover in transition among its members. Thank you for your leadership. Remember, as we move through this, please enter any questions for our panelists in the chat or Q&A function. Let's start with Representative Fahey and then Representative Breese Iverson, and then we'll move to Senators Wagner and Senator Knoop. Would you each please tell us about your priorities for the session and what you foresee unfolding in the coming weeks, particularly as it relates to Oregon's business community and private sector employers? Representative Fahey.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for having us all here today. So right now, I would say with the legislative session, one of my top priorities is seeing how we can support working families and small businesses. Outside of the legislature, I have worked as a business consultant for about 2 decades, helping businesses and nonprofits build skilled workforces and attract and retain employees. And I was a co-founder of a small business focused on that work. So that experience really has informed my policy making in the legislature with a focus on both small businesses and on workforce issues. So this priority of working families and small businesses, I got an email earlier today from the Oregon Business Plan folks highlighting 3 bills in the short session that they think will help increase shared prosperity around the state. So I thought I would talk about some of the bills in that category of supporting businesses and working families. And I'd start with those 3 bills that they flagged today. So one of which is the Senate Bill 1545, which is the governor's Future Ready Oregon workforce proposal to help address the immediate needs of preparing Oregonians for well-paying jobs. So her plan is focusing investments in some key industry sectors with the aim of helping those folks who have been historically faced disadvantages, including people of color, low-income people, women, rural communities, veterans. And so the plan will help, build skilled workforces and break down barriers to employment and give Oregonians the resources and pathways to succeed. So that's one big thing. I think that's gotten a lot of press, the $200 million proposed investment. There's also a bill about expanding access to broadband. So House Bill 4092 aims to create a series of robust, sustainable, and statewide broadband services. I think broadband is a really important part of closing the digital divide across the state. And then the other bill that they highlighted is House Bill 4117, which is the EIT, the Earned Income Tax Credit and Child Care Tax Credit, increasing usage of that tax credit and uptake of that tax credit to provide benefits for low-income working families. Also feel like I need to flag the major investments that we're talking about in childcare. We know that one of the barriers for folks returning to work, particularly moms, has been a lack of affordable childcare options. And so that'll be a big part of our conversation this session, is trying to support our childcare providers and make sure we expand the number of providers in the state. There are also, some sort of wonkier small business support bills. House Bill 4015 would make some improvements to the Entrepreneurial Development Loan Fund program, which provides loans to small businesses, and a few other proposals around providing small business support. So lots to talk about in terms of what we might do on the business and workforce front this session. We also are hoping to make significant progress in a few other areas, addressing our homelessness and housing crisis, bringing down the cost of living, investing in community safety and violence prevention, and then supporting our teachers in schools. So that's kind of the big picture of some of the issues that we plan to take on this legislative session.
Thank you. Representative Brees Iverson.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this today. I am pretty new in this job, but I'm getting my feet under me. I have some good people around. But what I'd like to point out is we are in a short session, and short session was originally intended for technical fixes, budgetary fixes, and agency overview. It was originally intended for a time for agencies to come back to the legislative body and let us know how they were doing. I think that we've gotten away from that in a large way, and the big issues that we're talking about are bigger than what we should be looking at in 35 days. So what my goals are for this short legislative session is that we would concentrate on fixing things that came out of the last session that didn't get out quite right, and there's a few of those bills in front of us. I also think that we need to work with state departments to improve their performance for Oregonians. Oregonians need to feel that they're being helped. We saw a lot of issues during 2020, and we tried to create some fixes last session, but we don't actually know if those fixes came through and worked. We haven't heard back from those agencies. I would easily point out that the employment department had some problems. We had some problems getting rent assistance out. I'd like to hear back from those agencies to see if we're fixing those problems, and have those agencies report back how they're fixing those and how we're working for Oregonians. I hope that this year we can recognize traditional Oregon for what it is. And for me, traditional Oregon is really about communities and Oregonians supporting each other. I think that as we've learned in this last 2 years of pandemic, that when put to the test, Oregonians can take care of, or within our communities, we can take care of each other. Local control does work. And I think that we need to get back to what traditional Oregon is and was, and we need to allow our local communities to support each other. We need to, in these various programs that we've talked about or that we're looking at putting dollars into this session, we need to make sure that we're giving those key pieces, those dollars, if you will, back to communities, and not just to nonprofits that don't reach across the state. We need to make sure that we're protecting and supporting Oregonians from every corner of this state. I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing across the state is public safety. And I think that there's a real opportunity to address that during this session. There were some things that were done in the last legislative session that we can make better right now. And we need to take care of Oregonians right now. We need to allow communities to feel safe. We need to allow neighborhoods to feel safe. And a lot of the issues that we dealt with during the last long session could have some easy fixes that would allow law enforcement to do their job. So as we look at this session and what's important, I think it's really important that we remember that Oregonians care about public safety. We need to be supporting that. We need to get some access to healthcare. We need to pay attention to our economy as we're all faced with inflation. And we need to remember that Oregonians are worth trusting.
Thank you. And Senator Wagner.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. In general, I think you're going to hear a lot of the same themes come out of us in terms of what this short session is and what we can accomplish. Some of the key areas that have been stated, and we can go deeper on them too, around strengthening the economy by investing in the future workforce. Since Representative Fahey talked about her background, I'll tell you a little bit about mine. I spent a lot of time doing education policy, and right prior to my tenure in the Senate, I worked at Portland Community College, working in the foundation, a lot of different positions. And it was something that was transformational when you were able to hand a scholarship check to a student that was coming back, regardless of their age, to try to get training into a different career field. And the state can be a better partner in that space. And that's why I'm really excited about the future ready investments that Representative Fahey was talking about that we see reflected in Senate Bill 1545. A second big area is investing in small businesses and community resiliency, which is really the backbone of our state economy. It doesn't matter your zip code or where you get your mail. We should be looking at what can we do to continue strategic investments and make sure small businesses and frontline workers are getting the support that they need to get back on their feet. And the last piece I think we'll focus a little bit of a theme on is around the cost of living right now, especially for lower wage workers who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Those pathways in careers, if you're trying to find that ladder in nursing or really making strategic investment, trying to get traditionally marginalized communities and women into manufacturing, I think it's a really exciting time with the disruptive conversations that what we're seeing in this economy to try to make those investments, encourage people to think differently about their career trajectory. So we know the economy is strong, but underlying that is, as I said, that not every community has benefited equally. We heard that from the Oregon Business Plan Summit. I was there, and you just know that everyone is really focused on future ready. The other piece around the urban-rural divide, we hear a lot about that. And I think there's just so much that unites us rather than divides us in that space. If you look at what a lot of states did, so ARPA, the federal legislation that was passed by congressional Democrats, I know I'm a partisan political official, but it was Democrats that passed that and signed by President Biden. Oregon took that as a mandate to be able to look at strategic investments across the state of Oregon. There's a great map. You can actually go on our website, or if anybody wants to talk to me afterward, and move your cursor around. You can look at the strategic investments we made in communities across Oregon. It was Republicans and Democrats coming together to talk about the need and where we needed to invest. And I think that's in an era of national politics being so divisive, to be able to come back together in Oregon and focus on some of those core investments. I think that we have a real promise to continue to do that work. And then returning finally on the cost of living, families right now, I hear it all the time. I get emails, access to affordable housing, partnering with local communities in that space. We continually need and hear from our constituencies that we need to be doing more. Childcare and healthcare, including mental and behavioral health supports. We need an incredible investment this last legislative session. We need to double down on that work. And finally, some of the underlying issues that we see that are holding back families, the cost of paying rent, looking at trying to pay for prescriptions and things like that. So I look forward to the conversation. So thanks for having me today as well.
Thank you. Senator Canoe.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you, OBI, for having me and us here today for a conversation. I think it's important. Senate Republicans really want to focus this session around being a constitutional session, both in word and spirit. So emergencies, budget, and technical fixes are what was sold to the people of Oregon when they were sold the short session, or what is referred to as annual sessions. And so, things that are emergency. I think we have a labor and workforce shortage that is very much an emergency and needs to be addressed this session. So to the degree that we can find common ground with the governor and Democrats in a bipartisan way, we'll certainly do that. We want to make sure that Oregonians are getting back to work, because that's the best way that they're going to be able to pay their rent and afford to live. And so working on those labor and workforce issues are important. Also, we think lowering taxes, especially as it relates to the CAT tax on prescription drugs and other things, but I think that's the focus, because in many rural areas, there's very little pharmacy access now for prescription drugs. And in some communities, you wait in line for hours to get those prescriptions refilled, because there's been a consolidation because of regulation such as and taxation such as the CAT tax. And I think that's incredibly important to our constituents who live in outside of let's just say outside of the urban areas, some rural, some suburban, but still very important to our constituents. And then I think you have to focus on what we can do to improve public safety and stop the lawlessness and crime that's going on. And we have a DA in Multnomah County whose program is a catch and release for crimes committed that he happens to agree with, but then he wants to prosecute people that he politically doesn't agree with. I think it's wrong. The governor has overreached on her commutations and pardons, let 1,000 people out so far, 19 have reoffended, and crime is spiking, especially in the metro areas. Gun violence is at an all-time high, and none of us should be surprised when you basically work and put pressure to defund our law enforcement who have been working so hard to keep us protected. So we have several measures that would increase funding for law enforcement, especially as it relates to stopping illegal marijuana grows. And the drug cartels have been setting up in many counties in Oregon, but especially in Southern Oregon. So certainly an emergency there. The state police, I think, needs more funding to keep up with Measure 110 and the issues that's causing. And I think just overall then, as it relates to communities that are heavily influenced by the timber community and forestry, we want to make sure that we're thinning our forests in the best way possible to make them as healthy as possible and to improve safety for our constituents. Because as we saw in the last couple of years with these massive wildfires, that they're a danger to communities as well as to health and the incredible asset that exists as our forests surround so many of these communities. And if you've driven the Santiam Canyon in the last year plus, you've seen what has happened. And so we want to appropriate funds to continue to work in those wildfire prone counties and areas to make them healthy. So we not only have safer communities, but we have better air quality which has struggled in some of these communities, and including mine and Bend, where the air is more brown than blue, and the summertime, and that's not gonna help anybody. So those are some of the priorities that we have this session, and we look forward to questions from your members.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your opening thoughts. As a reminder for our audience, please remember to enter questions into the chat or Q&A functions. We have several already, and we'll get to as many as possible. First question. There's been a good deal of turnover in both chambers in recent months. All of you have talked about working for resolving emergent issues. That requires relationships. How can the changes in the individuals sitting in different roles open up channels for productive meetings as you guys address emergent issues? And we'll start sort of almost in reverse order. This time we're going to start with Senator Wagner.
Hey, Jordan, sorry, I've got a bunch of family background noise here. I'll do the best that I can to check in. So yeah, it's interesting. I've been the Senate Majority Leader for, I don't know, 18, 19 months. And somehow at this table, though not in terms of my overall legislative experience, you know, when I talk about turnover, everyone reflected on this call is within either months or, you know, a couple years into the jobs. So I think it's actually a fun, exciting time for us to be able to kind of come together and know about how we want to work together. And I'm very confident that the citizens of Oregon with our citizen legislature send good people into this to be able to do work on behalf of their constituencies. And there's an opportunity for us to come together. I represent all three metro area counties. I've got large sections of Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas. And despite the fact that I would love to have folks live here and very proud of representing those communities, I do think that there's opportunities this legislative session to think differently about the disruption in our economy, where people don't necessarily have to live in the Portland metro area to have access to a good job. So if you think about broadband, you know, the things that we can do at an investment scale so that people can either commute from home so that they can plug into work, or they can actually live in a community that they want to live in, and that's, you know, which doesn't require you to commute 90 minutes into Washington County to be able to get that job. So that's, you know, I'm excited about the people that are there. I will say for my House colleagues, I do have some familiarity with who serves in the Senate. I hope every time I walk over to the House, I feel like I'm playing a game. I'm never really sure what I'm going to get walking over there, but I'm looking forward to their new members as well.
Thank you. Okay, Senator Knopp.
Well, thank you. I think the key really is that you need to reach out beyond, you know, your current caucus, your current base. And because we have new leaders, you know, I think we're going to have to leave some stuff in the past and operate on a basis that we're going to do what we can to work together. And I know that's hard because there's been a lot of, let's say, things in the past where there's been deals made that get broken, and there's been a lot of, let's say, trauma and drama as it relates to that. In the Senate, I feel like we've had a much better path. There's areas where we disagree, and what I've said is we want all voices to be heard, you know, not just the majority voices. And so when our voices are heard, respected, included, you know, we're going to stay at the table, we're going to work hard, and we're going to try to get things done for the people of Oregon, because there's a lot of good things that we can do. It's where, you know, the attitude starts to be, well, you know, we have the votes, we're going to do what we want. We don't have to include your amendments. We don't have to, you know, hear your bill. That's when things start to go bad. And then we have to use our tools that exist to get the attention of the majority. And since I've served in both the majority and the minority, I can tell you that when you're in the minority, that's what you do to use those tools and get heard. And so working on those relationships, we all have, all the leaders are, have relationships across the aisle. And I think it's important to make sure that we're continuing to strengthen those, because here's what I think is going to happen. The numbers are going to be much closer in the future, and it's going to serve everyone well who starts to build those relationships across the aisle and truly wants to work in a bipartisan way to get things done.
Thank you. Representative Brees Iverson.
Thank you. You have asked a really,
Yep.
There we go. Sorry, I still had a big unmute yourself comment on my screen. You ask a really interesting question, because there are many of us that are new in our position in leadership. And as Senator Knope mentioned, in recent years, the House Republicans have lost trust in the Democrat state leaders, and for a multiple of reasons. This session, we walked in looking for assurances, looking to change those conversations, and looking towards that new leadership to help us get there. We're still new in those conversations. We're still optimistic, but we're looking for the actions that will follow up the words that tell us that they're ready to have a different relationship with us as well. And I think that when we're realistic about where we've been in the last 2 years, the hybrid scenario of the long session and the inability to really connect or get to know each other across the aisle has kept us from that communication piece that really allows us to be real in some of these conversations. So not only are we just new in the leadership roles, but our caucuses are also fairly new and have not had a chance to get to know each other or find the trust across the aisle, if you will. And given some of the things that happened in this last session, the broken trust did cause some ongoing concerns as we move into this session. So as I mentioned earlier, we're cautiously optimistic. We want to have a different conversation. We are trying to have those connections. I would suggest that there's more communication, but the communication needs to be followed up with those actions. So we're looking forward to that. And just because I can't help it, I was just doing the count that not only are we new in leadership, I think in the last 2-3 months, we're also 6 new appointees in the House. So it just is another layer of that communication that we need to really build on, and an opportunity for new communication and new relationships across the aisle. So I'm looking forward to how this session ends, because I am certain that the House Democrats are ready for a different movement forward.
Thank you. And Representative Fahey, wrapping up the question on how can new relationships with new people in new roles create pathways as you work on emergent issues in the short session.
Thanks. I mean, I think I would just echo what I think just about everyone has said, which is that it really is all of us in new leadership roles and the new members that we have really is a chance to reset the table. I was really encouraged by how we were able to work together in the December special session, which was, just a few weeks ago. We came together on some of the most sort of emergent issues that needed to be dealt with right then. Housing, drought, the illegal cannabis issue that Senator Knope mentioned. And I think we worked together really well to come up with some proposals that could help people in all parts of the state in that session. I also feel like, Senator Knope mentioned the importance of relationships. And I was just looking at the folks on this call and thinking that I actually think I've probably spent the most time with Senator Knopp because we were on the student success tour together, traveling the state. So we spent about a year doing that tour together. And I think like I am looking forward to, post-pandemic doing more of that work together. I think those kinds of assignments that really, where we really dig in on policy and spend time with each other, I think are an important part of building those relationships. And then one last thing to flag just on the new leadership. There are 6 presiding officers and caucus leaders in this building. And right now, Senator Wagner is the only one who's from the Portland metro area. So, Speaker Rayfield and I are both, I'm from Lane County, he's from Benton County. And I represent House District 14 in Lane County, which in many ways I say is like a microcosm of the state. It has urban areas and suburban-like neighborhoods and rural areas and a couple small towns, and the range of issues that my constituents care about mirror what I think Oregonians as a whole are focused on. So I am excited about the geographic diversity of the leadership in our building now and the perspectives that will bring to making sure that we can, make sure that the entire state experiences economic prosperity post-pandemic.
Well, thank you. That is the end of our prepared questions. I'm going to step back now and let Eric field questions from the community. Eric?
Yes, thank you, Jordan. This question could be for either Senator Wagner or Representative Fahey, I think. Senator Knopp already, well, actually he didn't know. Anyway, so Oregon is awash in money thanks in large part to an infusion of one-time federal funds. What are you and your colleagues doing to ensure this funding is spent on one-time investments, not on ongoing programs that will require additional support in the future?
I was called out on this, so I'm happy to answer, but well, we know that the economy won't stay hot forever. It seems like every time we turn a quarter, people are talking about when is the downturn come. I was in and engaged and around the Oregon legislature back in 2002. I'd moved back from DC to my home state. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, was it Majority Leader Knopp in the early 2000s? And I don't think I need to tell anyone, we had 5 special sessions in 2002, and it wasn't to come in and make strategic investments in rural communities for drought relief. It was to come in and continue to cut budgets. And that was the year that we lost 2 weeks off the school year for a whole bunch of communities. So we're very laser focused on making sure we're making evidence-based, future-focused strategic investments in our budget to support businesses and lift up communities across Oregon. And the last 20 years, I'm pretty proud that since that time, I think there are huge lessons learned in Oregon. We didn't have an education stability fund. We didn't have a big rainy day fund. We didn't necessarily approach the ending fund balance as making sure that we were salting away the resources we needed for that rainy day. So I'm hopeful that we can continue with that same trajectory. We need to make the recovery dollars that we do have remaining to go to work for every community across the state. At the end of this last legislative session, President Courtney had a giant billboard up that had the state of Oregon. It was probably 12 feet by 6 feet or something. And there were little Post-it notes that were posted with ARPA and other investments all over the state. And I think that's the kind of focus that we have to have, is what are we doing to make strategic investments in communities across Oregon, make sure that we're making those investments, but then also thinking long-term about what are we doing toward the future. The last thing I will also mention is, I know in a lot of your businesses, you probably have equity-related statements. We can't lose diversity, equity, and inclusion as a cornerstone of how we're making decisions in the Oregon legislature. So there's a rural-urban conversation that's happening, but we also need to realize, as I said, that this economy and historically, not all communities have been impacted the same way. When we head into an economic downturn, we need to be really mindful that communities of color, women that haven't seen themselves reflected in certain types of jobs, we need to make those investments now so that there's education and training and that they have pathways to succeed and really to achieve the dream of what the promise of Oregon is.
And I can just jump in real quick since I was called by name too. Just to add a few things. I think a couple of things that Senator Wagner touched on. One, I would just say it's really important that we also save for future downturns. So it's both about making sure the funding is spent on one-time investments, as the question said, but also that we are saving for, we know the economy won't be this good forever. And so the revenue forecast won't be this good forever. And so saving for future downturns is incredibly important. And that's a part of sort of the budget plan for this session. Also, we'll flag that I think it is possible, and we are doing it, to spend money in a one-time way that actually makes meaningful progress on the challenges that we're facing right now. So housing and homelessness is such a great example of that. I happen to be the housing chair, so I talk about housing and homelessness a lot. But you know, we made record investments in affordable housing development, permanent supportive housing to help get people on the path out of homelessness. Homeless shelters and navigation centers last session. Those are all one-time infrastructure investments that can make a meaningful difference in that those big challenges that we're facing right now. And the other thing, just to flag from last session that we did that was sort of interesting, was we took a pot of those American Rescue Plan Act dollars, and we said every senator can allocate $4 million to one-time projects in their district, and every representative can allocate $2 million. And so that was a way to both spread the funding out throughout the state and make sure that every corner of the state benefited from that federal bill. And also, you know, here in Lane County, we came together as a group of legislators and funded things like childcare and food insecurity and housing and homelessness projects. And so I do think that we are spending that money in a one-time way and in a way that will make progress on those challenges that we're facing right now.
Okay, so here is one then for Senator Knopp and Representative Breeze Iverson. A lot of conversation and some action surrounds the supporting rural communities. It is our longstanding experience that many of the reasons rural communities need help in the first place is because of statewide legislation that harmed traditional rural industries. As a result, rural businesses are highly suspicious of further legislation as a fix for what's broken. Is there any mechanism for looking at existing legislation to see what can be eased or undone to restore vitality to those industries and communities?
Thanks, Eric. I would say that there is, but those things are more likely to be accomplished with Republican majorities. So I don't want to be too partisan about it, but I think there is a reality there. I think my Democrat colleagues have looked a little bit at some of these things, but when you do talk about rural areas and the urban-rural divide, it is very real. And when you're in these rural communities, for instance, Josephine County, about 30% of their budget used to come from essentially timber receipts, and now 2% comes from timber receipts. They've never recovered from that, and it's been decades now. And so that's why they don't have money for law enforcement to react, and the community doesn't feel like they can increase their taxes more to make up that difference. And so what is it the state will do to help communities like Josephine County and others? I mean, there are a bunch of Eastern Oregon counties that are in the exact same situation. And, the state needs to recognize what has happened policy-wise that has caused the financial trauma in these communities. And so we really do need to look at how we can best support these rural communities through allowing them to increase their natural resource, their natural resource, either harvesting or, use, because there's unlikely to be large high tech that goes into these rural communities that has really been the explosion for Washington County and, to some degree, Multnomah and Clackamas County. And maybe even a little bit in Lane County, and those just aren't going to happen in those rural areas. And so we as Republicans look at this legislation, whether it's, cap and trade or any other piece of legislation, and say, how is this going to work in our communities and allow rural and non-urban areas to actually survive? And so I think we use that lens all the time. And, I think if our colleagues used it more, there would be less of an urban-rural divide.
Thank you. I'll love to jump into this one. This is exactly what I started to talk about in my opening. I am a believer in traditional Oregon. Oregon was founded and built from small communities, and those communities, they understand the people inside their communities, and 100% we need to make sure that we don't create legislation that is a one-size-fits-all for every Oregon community, for every city. Oregon is so diverse, geographically, population, all of it. We need to respect that as we consider legislation inside this building. And I say this often, we need to respect that one size does not fit all. Local control is really the way that we allow communities the ability to know how and help sustain growth inside themselves. It's if we could take away the statewide mandates, some of the agency regulations, even the executive orders that we've seen in the last few years, and allow communities to decide what works for them, then I think that we answer this concern. And turns out, I trust Oregonians. I think our communities I might be completely biased. I do represent a lot of small communities, but those communities are amazing, and they show up for each other, they take care of each other, and they know what they need. And I trust them to make those right decisions.
Thank you. This next one is for the two representatives, Representative Fahey and Representative Reese-Iverson. The labor and workforce shortage has arguably been in a crisis mode for over a year for most sectors, including those of high-wage manufacturing, construction, healthcare, and other sectors. Employers are wondering if the multiple investments in workforce will address the immediate pipeline need. If so, how? If not, is there consideration to fund a 3 to 6 month skills-based accelerated trainings program tied to what employers need, not just state-approved apprenticeship programs?
I'm happy to go first, but Leader Reese-Iverson, if you'd rather go first. Okay. I really appreciate the question. It actually is a very timely question, and it's a timely conversation that we're having right now. I think a couple of weeks ago, all of us were on a media interview where Senator Knopp and I flagged this issue, like the $200 million proposal that the governor has put out is a really important part of making sure we can sort of build a skilled workforce and make sure that they're ready for higher paying jobs. But much of what's in there is longer term investments, and those are really important to do. I'm not minimizing the importance of those longer term investments, but it's absolutely correct that our businesses are struggling now to hire the workers that they need. And so that in the legislature, we're having those conversations right now about how to do a balanced approach that has some investments for the long term, but also more immediate, how do we involve our community colleges and our local workforce boards in more immediate help for businesses in that way. And I think there are a couple of other sort of smaller policy bills that might help from a workforce perspective in more targeted ways. We have an educator workforce bill, healthcare workforce. I have a bipartisan bill about giving consumers the option for self-serve gas with Representative Bossart Davis, which will maybe ease the workforce challenges in a very, very, very tiny way. But I do think that is it's an excellent point, and it's one that we're working on right now. We have legislators that are sorting through what the actual recommendation on the workforce package will be out of the legislature. And I think there's bipartisan agreement about wanting to have something at least from what I've heard from Senator Knoop, about wanting to have that combination of more longer term and shorter term investments.
Thank you. I concur that there is a consideration we need to really take a long look at. I think that it's a multi-pronged effort here. And while there might be some dollars that we need to invest in the workforce retraining, I do think that we have some great skills and community college that work with trade associations to provide some of those skill set trainings. And I think we definitely need to continue to support those. But I think the real answer to this problem is if we could just roll back some of the mandates and let people work. And I think that is a large part of what we're facing right now, is that there are folks who want to, and they find that they can't, and they're restricted for a multitude of reasons. But for right now, I think the first and the fastest, best answer is to take back some mandates and let those folks work.
Thank you. And maybe we have time for one for the senators, Senator Knoop and Senator Wagner. As you may know, Intel, Oregon's largest private employer, announced plans to build multiple semiconductor plants in Ohio. Such a project would not be possible near its facilities in Oregon at the moment because there are no shovel-ready parcels of suitable size. Other Oregon manufacturers have indicated they are not investing in the state as a result of rapidly expanding regulations and tremendous regulatory uncertainty. What should Oregon do to create more opportunities for manufacturing companies to grow or relocate here?
How come Fahey gets the career pathways question and I get Intel? I want to check in on this. Like, who's directing this stuff? No, I'm just kidding. No, on the well, maybe I think it ties into the conversation that you were just having around the Future Ready legislation. When you think about, you can have a job. There's a lot of people with jobs, but what people really want is a career. And so what are you doing to build career pathways? How are you incenting people to come in? And apologies, that's my COVID dog, 2 dogs, that's the COVID dog. If you look at, so my wife is on the board of Portland Community College. She's a high tech exec. She's on the Oregon Workforce Talent Advisory Board. So I get a lot of this in my ear every dinner. What are we doing to be able to provide opportunities for folks to be able to, get their CNA and get on a licensure track for healthcare? So that's something that we could be doing, and what we are planning on doing, that we are doing right now. And if we pass that bill, that's good. There's going to be more of that. As it relates to Intel, it's interesting. Last night, I was just watching the Olympics, like hopefully a lot of people are. Nathan Chen just crushed it in the short program. And during the course of that, Intel's advertising for folks to come work at the fabs right now. And I thought that was, really interesting. Certainly manufacturing, there's a ton of attention on this, and there's a lot of work and conversation that needs to happen. I'm super supportive, of OMIC and other investments, both in the time that I was at Portland Community College as well as now. So I'm definitely interested in sitting out at the table and figuring out what we can do to get towards solution long-term around increasing manufacturing opportunities. And again, not just for sort of traditional manufacturing. What are the jobs of the future? How are we, how is Oregon and Oregon government playing a partnership role with corporations in that space?
My response to that would be we have several things that need to happen. Been talking about them for years, but we need to change Oregon land use law to allow for much bigger industrial opportunity in our communities. Each county needs to have a significant amount of land that is available, that is shovel ready. We talked about this over 20 years ago. So these issues come back around, and we're going to miss out on expansion and companies that want to come here. Oregon is a great place, but it's also an expensive place for business right now. And it hasn't gotten any less expensive over the last several sessions based on the taxes that have been added and so on. So one of the things we can do is through land use to actually be ready. Because I know there just wasn't the sites available for Intel and for other companies too that have looked to expand. And so that's one easy place. I think the other is to relook at the cat tax and how we are taxing businesses in the state. Obviously, we have some proposals to lower the cat tax in some areas, and I think we need to really have those types of conversations, because if we don't, we're going to be less competitive, and over time, that's going to be very detrimental to Oregon's ability to continue to attract the kind of jobs that every legislator says that they want, which good family wage paying jobs.
Okay, cool. Thank you all very much for your time today. As we circle up here at the end of this session, if you could all just take 30 seconds to sort of reflect on the thoughts from today and where you plan to be focused based on today's conversation in tomorrow's week of activity crammed into a day. And we'll start, mix up the order again. Senator Knoop, we'll start with you.
Well, just very briefly, we need to focus on workforce, and we need to focus on basically stopping the lawlessness and crime and the soft on crime things that the governor has been doing that are leading to a less safe Oregon. Oregonians want to feel safe in their communities, and they want to be able to have good jobs. And I think if we do those two things coming out of this session, that would be a better Oregon.
Thank you. Representative Fahey.
Thanks so much for having us. I'll answer that question, but I see a question in the chat about affordable housing, about workforce housing, and I can't help myself because I am a housing nerd. Legislature has done some really great stuff to remove barriers, particularly around middle housing, and making it easier, removing barriers to building middle housing. And there's some other policies that we put forth on workforce housing. Happy to talk about that offline if you'd like. In terms of what I'm focused on for the next few weeks, it really is, making sure that we can make some real progress on some of those big challenges that matter to Oregonians right now: homelessness and housing, cost of living things around childcare and healthcare, investing in community safety and violence prevention, and then supporting our teachers in schools, making sure kids can be in school in person 5 days a week. I really think, I know that there's lots of conversation always about a short session and what it's intended for, but I just don't think Oregonians want us to wait another year to address those challenges. I think we have a duty and an obligation to make meaningful progress while we are in a regular session right now. It is our first regular session since the start of the pandemic, and since our first regular short session since the start of the pandemic and the wildfires. And it's exactly why the short sessions were created. So I'm hopeful that we can get a meaningful amount done given the work that's gone into prepping for this session.
Thank you. Representative Brees Iverson.
Thank you. Based on today's conversation, I think Oregon businesses are struggling for workers, and we need to make sure we aren't holding Oregonians back from working. I think COVID has created a wedge between customers and employees, and I think that's because of animosity that exists in society. So we need to assure people that they can return to work and they can get back to normal. I think House Republicans trust that everyone knows how to stay safe and healthy as much as we can after 2 years of a pandemic. So let's start moving forward to fill those open jobs, get Oregonians steady paychecks, and give them room to get back on with their lives.
Thank you. And Senator Wagner.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. And thanks for having me. And I know my colleagues will speak for all of them. I was listening to a podcast. I was telling Angela Wilhelms, your amazing president here, of an interview that she had on the Oregon Bridge. And about 15, 60 minutes in, she said, how are businesses doing? She said, they're feeling exhausted. And then she kind of went on and kind of explained why. And then she said, but they're also optimistic. And I want to lean into both those things. Lean into the promise of Oregon. You asked what people can do. We need to push back against the tide of negativity and partisan bickering. And I think we can come together to strengthen our economy by investing in our future workforce, supporting small business community resiliency, and really addressing the cost of living, especially, as I said, for lower wage workers that we're trying to build career ladders. So for the business community that's out there who you represent, come to the table as partners, help us find solutions. The door is open.
Well, thank you very much. And unfortunately, we have hit our time. So thank you to all of our panelists for your time today and for your service in our legislature. And have a great evening. Thank you all.